for hosting me this afternoon. So it's lovely to be with you. And thank you everybody for signing up for this and coming along this afternoon. It's always lovely that people want to come and hear you speak on a subject that you're passionate about. So thank you very much for that. And I hope to give you some bits to take away today. And yeah, happy to answer questions and more of a discussion at the end as well. I think we've already had some questions in, and hopefully there'll be more as we go along. So I'm Rob, and I am going to be speaking today on inclusive approaches to recruiting trustees and other volunteers. And I'll introduce myself a little bit more fully in a moment or two. But let me start out by telling you about what I'm going to cover. So this afternoon, I'm going to cover with you the importance of diversity. I'm going to cover getting the culture right. I'm going to talk about inclusive recruitment approaches, and I'm going to cover off how you can move forward some tips and ideas and things to think about for diversifying your volunteer group and your trustees as well. There's a lot of things that relate to both volunteers and trustees, but there's also some specific trustee bits that I'll chat through as well. And then I'll give you some takeaways at the end. That's not free pizza. That's some suggestions in terms of things to take away. It'd be lovely if there's free pizza, wouldn't it? But some bits to take away and different ideas to think through. And then I'll talk a little bit about how I can help and the areas that I can support you with as part of this conversation. So without further ado then, let me introduce myself so you know who I am, my background and my experience. So as Mushka mentioned, I'm Rob Avann. I'm a charity consultant and interim chief exec. I have my own business that I've just launched at the back end of this year, orchardparkconsulting.co.uk. And my email address is there, rob@orchardparkconsulting.co.uk. But let me tell you about my background. So about me, so I spent 8 years as a charity chief exec, a couple of different charities in that capacity. Volunteer management was a massive part of what we did and the changes that we made. I also I currently am up to 16 years as a charity trustee. I was first a trustee before my 25th birthday. I'm still doing it now at the age of 41. And I've been a trustee for 5 different charities over that time, and they ranged in different parts of the sector. So it's fair to say I'm a bit of a serial trustee. I enjoy it. I really enjoy the experience of doing it, and I've learned an awful lot from it that relates to the rest of my experience as well. And I've been a trustee for all sorts of charities. So a youth charity operating locally, a mental health charity. I've done a national collections charity, an independent museum, and a grant giving trust for like a hardship fund in the education sector. So a range of different experiences, really. They've all been different and all been interesting. I've spent 5 years mentoring other chief execs, particularly first timers, doing it for the first time, because it's a totally different challenge and often very lonely experience being a chief exec. So lots of stuff around that. My volunteering experience is over 20 years of different things. Still do a lot of volunteering now of different capacities and different things that interest me. So volunteering's always been there and always been a part of my my focus. And I was also, feel free to throw stuff at me, but I was also the head of specialist volunteering for the Labour Party in the year leading up into the other side of the general election, and particularly focused on introducing skill-based volunteering to our approach and to help us to win the election. And now I'm a consultant and interim chief exec and focusing on leadership, governance and strategy. And I'll talk a little bit more later about what those are, but that's me and my background. But I'd really love to hear about you. So please, in the comments, tell us about you, name, charity, what made you sign up this afternoon, what you'd really like to get out of it. Please tell me, questions along the way. We'll deal with them all at the end, but it'd be great to hear, views, things that you want me to cover off or that I haven't mentioned, or questions from the content as we go through. And failing anything else, we're on the 4th of December today. I don't know if anybody yet has hit a mince pie or cracked out a Christmas jumper or watched their favourite Christmas film if you celebrate Christmas. But if you have, then maybe add that into the chat as well. It's always interesting to see. All right, cool. So let me crack into the first section then. So the first bit is the importance of diversity and why it's so important for our sector and why I'm passionate about it, really. So the importance of diversity. Look, I appreciate everybody signing up today. You're already, champions, advocates. You want to, see change and want things to move forward. So I'm not going to spend time sort of dragging you through the stats, the sort of the rationale, the evidence in terms of what needs to change in our sector. I expect you're, like me, already well aware of that and want to see things change. And it's, there's no doubt at all our sector has some very substantial and historic ingrained issues that we need to overcome. And there is lots of work out there that's going on to change things. And things are changing, but there's still an awful long way to go, and they have not moved as quickly or as rapidly as they could. And some of that is also about our model as charities that, to a large extent, it's a Victorian model and it needs some changes, but we are where we are and we've got to, make do and make the best of and change it for the better. It's also true that groups with greater diversity of thought make fundamentally better decisions. There is a ton of stuff out there from, management stuff to academics to others in terms of the thing that for humans, that diversity of thought and perspective and input is so important for us to make rounded decisions, because we all bring to the table our own backgrounds, our own experiences, our own things that we've lived through, our own upbringing. And sometimes we need to see those other perspectives of other people who've had very, very different experiences to us to help with that overall decision making. And so diversity here, for me, we're talking about diversity in its widest sense. It's about diversity of thought for me, in terms of people who think differently, who bring different perspectives, different skills, different life experiences to the table within the charity. And so that cuts across every demographic or characteristic, whatever you want to think about. That's part of diversity in that. So I hope that makes sense in terms of what we're talking about here and what we're covering. And I think it's also really, really important that we remember that those that we serve and support as charities should see themselves represented, including at management and board level. So that's not in operations. That is really important too, don't get me wrong. Seeing people deliver services who represent the communities they're delivering them to is really important. But to see people represented at management and board level, and that's where some of the big areas need to change and to move forward. And that's why we've got so much work still to do on that side. And that only changes if we've got a sort of proactive and self-aware approach. And you might be sitting there thinking, this is great for you to say that, Rob, but you're a white, middle-class, middle-aged man. And so are you the right person to talk about diversity? And that would be a fair sort of challenge to throw back in my direction. And I think for me, in terms of my trustee and leadership roles that I've had over time, what's been really important is to try and use whatever privilege or ability I have to actually carve out space for other people who are not like me to rise into those positions and to move things forward. And so that's why, for me, it's such an area of passion and importance, because I believe in our sector fundamentally, and I think we do amazing things, but we could do things a lot better and a lot differently in the future. And so I want to see us get there. So that's the importance of diversity. Like I say, I'm not going to go into loads of the stats and the evidence and all the rest of it. There's loads of resources out there can point people towards it if you want to do some more reading or some other areas of things. But like I say, I'm guessing you are all well aware and really keen for this to change. So let's move on to another area for me that I think is really, really important. So before we get into the sort of tactics stuff about changing role descriptions and processes for recruiting volunteers, which is absolutely important. But for me, what is absolutely fundamental and often gets missed out of conversations around inclusivity is getting the culture right. because fundamentally, if you don't get the right culture, you will struggle to deliver plans and strategies and things moving forward. You've probably all heard or seen this quote a million times from different people, and you often see it attributed to different speakers and authors over the years. There's a management speaker called Peter Drucker who said something very similar. Steve Jobs has also had this sort of ascribed to him. There are lots of people out there that have at different times and in different places. But fundamentally, for me, in every part, when I look back at different career experiences that I've had in organisations, I think for me this absolutely hits home. Culture eats strategy, because if you don't have the right culture or organisation, if your culture is toxic, if it's not open, if it's not welcoming, if it's not got a focus on well-being and on other elements, you can have the best laid plans that you want. You can have amazing services. You can have, recruit the best people, but you will always struggle to deliver. Sooner or later, it will come crashing down because the culture isn't right and isn't there to support it. So for me, culture should be the first thing to sort of focus on in this wider discussion, rather than just purely on the sort of tactical changes and things that we can make. So let me unpack that a little bit and explain it a little bit more so. So for me, I think culture revolves around these two things. And you might have a different definition for you, and that's absolutely right, to think about this differently. But for me, this sort of rings true, that you need to have these two elements, and they need to be in balance with one another. They both need to be there and be present. So on the one side, you've got to have an open and safe environment. And by that, I mean it's got to be psychologically safe. I'll talk more about that in the coming slides. But it's got to be an inclusive organizational environment which welcomes, respects, and treats newcomers and difference with openness, with kindness, and with curiosity. Respect's got to be there. It's fundamental for it. So you need an environment that is the right sort of place where people can have conversations. They can be open and be welcomed in and respected and treated right. But alongside that, you've got to have the other side of the screen here. You've got to have clear and reinforced boundaries, because you need to be able to have the right sort of policies, procedures, and actions actually being taken to constantly reinforce where those boundaries are and what's okay in our environment and what's not, and who's welcome and who isn't, in terms of the views that they maybe bring and how they act towards other people. And I'm sure all of us can think from lots of our experiences of organizations where they've had great policies, great procedures, but actually fundamentally things haven't been done about individuals who maybe have stepped outside or not behaved in the right kind of way in terms of that environment and how things move forward. And without having that, your culture will always creak slightly, because unless those boundaries are reinforced, people won't have confidence in it, and it won't stay the course. So I think that's a really important element to have. So breaking into those a little bit more and what I sort of mean and want to focus on here. On building an open and safe environment, as I mentioned, I think for me, the aim is to create a psychologically safe environment. You want to encourage conversation. You want it to be okay for people to talk about how they feel, to talk about how things impact on them, to talk about their backgrounds, their experiences in a safe environment. You also want people for there to be some safe spaces where people can talk about their fears, the other things, the other side of it. Because if you don't allow space to talk about those things, they will come out in other ways, because people can't deal with them and move forward. And I think that's really important, particularly when you're talking about diversity. You need strong and proactive really good emotional intelligence and take people on the journey with them around these areas of change. There's also a lot around striving for understanding. You want to underpin it with respect ultimately as the first things first, but you want that understanding to be there. And it's important to be able to celebrate diversity and different life experiences and backgrounds, and sort of find things that level everybody, where they can connect and they can share in a way that's sort of more human. So for me, one of the examples I've often found is a good sort of leveler is something like food, because it's a basic human, need, right? And we all have food experiences, food loves, food, history in our families, our backgrounds, our upbringings, those sorts of things to sort of share. But you can level with food because you can kind of understand it, you can share it, you can move around it. So find things that sort of level people and enable them to have those sorts of discussions and sharing. And finally, the other thing I'd say on this is that often partnering diversity with other issues is a good one. You also need psychological safety to talk about well-being and to talk about mental health and to talk about other related issues. So actually it's quite good to partner it up and have a sort of a wider conversation as part of that culture in the charity. And I think, unfortunately, the word diversity has almost got used by sort of, right-wing press as sort of the culture war stuff, as almost sort of a toxic term, and just a term in and of itself can almost cause issues and fears and other things around it. And so actually maybe finding ways to talk about it in a different way, call it community, call it, whatever it is that's meaningful to you and means something and enables those conversations to happen. Because ultimately, I mean, for me, I think it is about community, right? It's about the community we're all part of and we all want to be, part of moving forward. So hopefully that takes some of the issues away from it and enables people to have an open conversation. And the other element is clear and reinforced boundaries. So clear policies and procedures, as I mentioned, bullying and harassment, social media, codes of conduct, all really important, should be there. And should be regularly reviewed and sort of updated with learning and experience that comes forward. Having really clear expectations for volunteers, which includes their role in culture, because they have a role in it too, in terms of welcoming other people and creating that environment, and reinforcing that things like microaggressions are not welcome as part of that experience. And there needs to be, and I've underlined it here, and I mentioned it earlier on, there needs to be that proactive, actually dealing with incidents when they come up. You have to take a front foot approach and actually deal with stuff, because if you don't, you can have amazing policies, but they won't mean anything, and your culture won't move forward and change, because people lose faith when you don't take any action and do anything about it. So that's really, really important. And obviously training is critical. Now, obviously investing in training costs money, and money is tight for all of us in the sector. But there are lots of really good resources out there. There are increasing numbers of free and low cost resources, or build your own, around it and do different elements as part of that. So that's really clear and reinforced boundaries, and they're the two elements of getting the culture right for me. Now, the third area, so talking about inclusive recruitment and sort of inclusive recruitment journeys. So for me, these four pillars are sort of the absolute fundamentals. I mean, this is, absolutely bare minimum of what we should be doing and getting right. But they're also the four pillars to really think around and think about what you're doing and how those each of those is sort of supporting the journey that you want to have. And I'll delve into these in more detail in the coming slides. But role remits, it's really important to have really good role descriptions in a language that means, things to people, that isn't jargon heavy, that is sort of minimal for what you need, doesn't bog people down in too much detail and too much operational stuff, but does absolutely talk about what the role really is and what it's about and how it fits into the bigger picture and how important it is. Selection criteria, obviously you've got to have criteria for any volunteer position, but it's also important to remember criteria are barriers too, right? So think of them on both sides. Think of them as helping you do filtering, but they're also turning away people who might otherwise be effective volunteers if you don't get that criteria right, and it's not the absolutely salient points of they must or they need to have these areas. Because if you have a 20-piece person spec for a volunteer role, you are killing off lots of possible volunteers who might otherwise do a very effective role if it's not absolutely you've reduced it, distilled it down to its absolute essence of these three things we're really looking for in terms of how you move forward, and being open-minded about that. But we'll talk more about that in the coming slides. The third fundamental pillar is having a really fair process, having it, fair, open recruitment, having recruitment panels that are diverse themselves. People can see themselves represented in who it is who's selecting them is really, really important. So looking at those elements and looking at ways that you can achieve that, even if you don't have it, in ready supply, can you work with others around you, community leaders, other organisations in your area or in your patch of work to address that and move it forward. And you've got to have feedback as part of that fair process too. Feedback for me is fundamental too. And the fourth pillar here, I've called it onboarding. I'm not sure if I quite like the word onboarding, if I'm honest, but and it's an interesting one because it's becoming more and more prevalent too, and you've probably got views on that. But it sort of covers a number of areas really in terms of the welcome, the sort of the induction that you put people through, the training, and then their ongoing support as part of a relationship that you're starting with volunteers that continues, throughout the time that they're with you. So they're the 4 pillars, and I'll talk more about these. So at minimum, you absolutely want to have really comprehensive role descriptions. You want to be really clear on time commitments. And this is people often think they're clear on time commitments, but actually they aren't. And getting feedback from your own volunteers about those time commitments and how they're classed is really, really important. For trustee roles, this is a major issue too, of people not being clear on time commitments. Really clear criteria, like I say, don't make it like really random stuff that people have to have. Think of the barriers that you might put up otherwise in terms of how you move things forward. So try and enable people. And if it's something that, if your current criteria supports your current volunteer group only, then it's really thinking through, well, actually, that in itself has become a barrier to us because we're never going to be able to fully diversify if we're only ever appealing to people, from certain backgrounds or other things. Fair and open processes, as I mentioned. So thinking about who's on the panel, being open about gaps that you've got that you're trying to address, those sorts of bits I'll talk more about in a minute. Advertising widely, really openly, and being really deliberate. So if you're looking for people from a particular background or from a particular skill or lived experience or whatever it might be deliberate about it. Go where they are. Think through sort of routes towards getting and gaining that experience or bringing in people who match, your needs. And again, be really open about your gaps as well in terms of if you're doing work to address certain issues, then be clear about that, be open about it. Feedback, as I've mentioned, leaving a really good impression. People are future supporters of yours as well, moving forward. And then obviously the welcome is a sort of a start of a relationship and moving forward in terms of how you do that and maintain it. So let's go into these in a bit more depth then in terms of diversifying your volunteers and trustees and things to think through and maybe add to your approach. So you might be thinking, that's great, Rob, but where do I start, in terms of taking things forward and sort of moving on? And I completely understand that. And sometimes it's about starting small and sort of building things up with, one role or some areas rather than trying to do everything. So all the things I'm about to go through, it isn't necessary that you need to do all of them straight away and sort of, blow the whole approach, but you can start small, pick out a few salient things that are right for your organisation, and then gradually, like once you start making that change, you can add to it and sort of build it up. So in terms of the overall approach, as I've mentioned, open and fair recruitment should be the absolute standard, unless there's a really good reason not to do open recruitment. And I can think of very few reasons as to why that would be the case. You should absolutely be doing open and fair recruitment all the way through. I'll talk more about trustees and the problem with sort of the black book approach of, I recruit somebody I know to be a trustee. Well, of course, that means they're probably from, similar backgrounds, similar life experience, and those sorts of things. So there's lots of issues on that front. So think through open and fair recruitment. And inform it by the internal information that you've got. And if you haven't got it, build it. So think about, auditing your diversity and your skills gaps. Run some surveys, capture that information when people arrive and come into the organisation. and compare and contrast it to those that you serve. You know, how sort of out of whack or how close is it, or is there some little areas where actually that oftentimes in lots of organisations you find that some areas they're actually really strong in once they start looking at it, and there's maybe a few areas of weakness that they can start working on. So that narrows your sort of your work already in terms of what you actually need to change and what you need to work on. So it can be helpful on both sides, helping you with targeting and also helping confidence of, you know, actually we're okay here, but we need help in this other area. Develop a recruitment policy from that, which includes actions to tackle those gaps and be really clear about it. Consider where and how you advertise, as I've mentioned already, and think about the experience for different people. Personas, I think you had a lunch and learn about personas a while back and mentioned around that. That can be a helpful way of sort of framing your, you know, your views on things. I would also always sort of say, I think it's really helpful to get real experience from real people, you know, to actually have, you know, little working groups, or to have focus groups, or to do something different with people of actually putting stuff in front of them and getting them to sort of give you the feedback in terms of, well, that advert just wouldn't work for me because straight away you've put me off because of this or whatever. Because again, we only see our own perspectives. It's very, very hard for us to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and see the world exactly as they see it and their sort of feedback. So thinking about gaining that feedback is really important, particularly around language, oftentimes. Roles and expectations then. So I would always push towards having as much of a mixed economy of volunteer roles as you can, because it helps with the greater the range of the sort of roles and capacities that you've got, the more diversity you're building into your volunteer group straight off, right? Because if you've got you know, micro, small roles, and you've got all the way up to, you know, much greater time commitments, trustee roles or other capacities in service delivery. Though, you know, if you have a range across that, and you have roles that can be completed from different locations at different times of the day, by different skill sets, by different people, then you are hopefully adding to your ability to draw in many more different people into your overall organisation and sort of pool. So definitely trying to step back and think, if we've got all these roles, but all of them you've got to be available in the working day, well, that rules out a whole cohort of the community who are never going to be able to do that and take that on and sort of commit to that. Or equally, if you can only do our roles, you know, from home, remotely, using digital, and we've got digital exclusion, you know, is an issue as well, then you've got, you know, the other side of the coin to sort of think through. So really thinking through the ask about working hours, availability, location, all of those sorts of bits. Reviewing expenses offer, again, you know, if you can offer support with childcare, if you can offer, you know, a meal, you can offer, you know, other sorts of ways of being able to draw people in. There's lots of other things, you know, to think about beyond that. Then your expenses offer should absolutely like underpin and support your overall approach. And term limits, I think, you know, really important for both volunteer roles and trustee roles. I'll talk more about trustees in a bit, but term limits for other volunteer roles can be really helpful, because it helps you step back and refresh the group, you know, from time to time, and look at your overall volunteer body and make changes and move things on and slide things about in different ways. So I think sometimes term limits can be helpful from that point of view. Obviously, there might be capacities where that just isn't relevant for you, and that's fine. But it's certainly one to think about. And the process really matters, right? So, you know, reviewing your application pack, thinking about language, thinking about how welcoming it is, thinking about how easy it is to submit. Have you given, you know, can you give different formats, different ways of applying? You know, does everybody have to do a CV and a covering letter? You know, do you do, you know, other ways of applying? Would you accept video, you know, submissions? Would you, you know, think about things in a different way that maybe is more relevant to different people and different groups? And try to really make it personal with your information that you put out there, make it more personable to people, in the sense of showing your culture and your values as an organisation. showing them some videos of of volunteer experiences of what it's like to be with you, and why it's important, and all of that sort of element that can really help bring it to life for people, as opposed to written formats. Offer an informal chat before applying, particularly for trustee roles, but it can be useful for other capacities. Obviously, understanding time, is also a factor and a cost, and those sorts of elements too. We talked about diverse recruitment panels, and of course the importance of giving feedback as well. And then this final part of this is really supporting, welcoming, and including people. So it goes back to the culture element that I was talking about earlier on. And it's very much thinking about that relationship with those volunteers and recognizing the diversity of thought and background and experience and perspective that they bring, and that you're doing it for that reason and that reason alone. That you absolutely recognize the value that different perspectives and different perspectives and different life experiences are going to bring to your organization, rather than going down the tokenistic or tick box route. I would absolutely never advocate going down that route. If that's the only reason you're doing it, it's the wrong one, and it will come a cropper sooner or later. It's very much about doing it for the right reason, and that you recognize actually what they bring to your organization and how it moves forward. Keeping that conversation going, and of course not forgetting that volunteers are also ambassadors for your organisation, and to also make use of volunteers too, in that capacity, in terms of talking to other people and getting them involved and wanting to be a part of your organisation. As I mentioned earlier on, if necessary, start small. Prove it works with one role, one area, a few small bits, and build the approach, and then share success from there. Because if you can start building momentum for change, it's a lot easier to start unraveling some of the more complicated or more complex bits later on. But start somewhere on that journey, and begin to sort of make that change and move it forward. Now, on trustee boards, and I could talk about this for quite a while in terms of different perspectives on trustees and on the things that need to change, but absolutely here, if you want to diversify trustee boards, trustee term limits and the ability to flex the total number of the trustees is often, they're both quite helpful in terms of doing that, because if you've got space to play with, it allows you to sort of play with the group in terms of how you move things forward and how you attract things and try out different bits. And term limits are absolutely fundamental to encourage change and to encourage that churn. Now, obviously, it is difficult to recruit trustees, and there are often there are loads of vacancies across the sector and all the rest of it around it. But I think that's also because we need to fundamentally rethink how we do it and how we recruit people and who we're recruiting into those capacities. So there's a lot that needs to change. I've talked about diversity and skills audits as part of that, and building a real recruitment policy off the back of doing those. That helps you sort of guide your work in terms of what you're doing and how you're moving forward with it. And then also sometimes, again, something I've done previously and found to be really helpful is creating a subcommittee for the board, or a small working group that's focused on EDI issues and is reporting to the board regularly and is moving things forward, and sort of looking for those allies both inside the organisation and external to it that see that things can change and need to change, and developing a bit of an action plan. So sort of encouraging shared leadership of it and moving things forward can be really helpful and important. Obviously being clear on time commitment. And then there's lots of things that are going on across the sector of people playing with different ways to bring in new voices into trusteeship, which is really, really important. So, thinking about when the board meets, and how it meets is really, really important in terms of doing that, and maybe playing with that a little bit where, over the course of the year, it flips and changes in terms of how that's done and how it meets, because that, again, can help and build confidence in it. Shadow boards is a really interesting one, and a few charities have done this really successfully of having shadow board members. They're not full trustees, but they're coming in to support and attend trustee meetings and have all the papers and ask questions the same as everybody else, and it builds their confidence gradually and also builds the confidence of the board in terms of the direction of travel and the movement and the change that needs to happen, why this is important and what they bring and what they offer. So there's lots of work going on in that space that's really interesting. Having observers at board meeting can be a really good one. Sometimes inviting community leaders along or doing other things to sort of open it out and encourage people to come forward. Having nominated spaces for first-time trustees or young trustees, but doing it for the reason of, again, the thoughts and perspectives that they bring, not just because they are first-time trustees only, or because they're a young person that you're asking them to represent all young people in the entire universe. Think through their experiences of what they're actually bringing and what they're adding to the group that's beyond just the demographic that they match. Exploring co-chairing can be really important. Also considering paying trustees. And again, I've got an asterisk here because obviously you need to tread carefully with charity commission approval and other things around it. But there is more and more moving in this direction and more openness to this of a way forward, that we've got to start thinking about other ways of trustees being able to take on those obligations that aren't only people at a certain stage of life with, at a certain career stage, at a certain life stage, that are able to be trustees. It needs to widen out. And then also playing with the way business is done, thinking about other ways of doing it, other software, other sorts of examples, rather than just going with the same model that we've all been doing for, forevermore, in terms of the same structured agendas and a meeting 4 times a year and whatever it might be. So playing with some of that can be really important as well towards the overall diversification. Okay, so now coming towards the end, takeaways in terms of bits to take from the session. So fundamentally, my sort of number one thing to sort of take away from this is to never lose sight of why you're doing it, and to never move away from that this is about diversity of thought and perspective, which makes our organisations make much more rounded and better decisions, and an organisation that is truly run by and for the people that it claims to serve and support. That's fundamentally why we should be doing this and why it's a good thing for the sector to do and why it needs to change. But never losing sight of that and never getting bogged down too much in other sort of tokenistic approaches or other things is fundamental for me. So on to more specific points to take away. Focus on culture. Including the support is really, really important. As I mentioned, you can have best laid plans on other fronts, but unless you start addressing culture and you start working on that, then that will hold you back sooner or later with trying to deliver those best laid plans. Change requires leadership and emotional intelligence to do it properly and to deliver in terms of moving forward. Unfortunately, we can't avoid that. So it's about finding and having the right leadership to move those things forward. And trying to step out of the day-to-day as much as we can. We're all busy, right? And running charities is hard and hard work and a lot going on all the time and being thrown at us. But trying to find some time or carving out some time to step out of the day-to-day and look at the bigger picture and do those things like, the audits in terms of diversity and skills, thinking about our overall volunteer offer and how many roles have we got that, meet at certain times or need capacities, doing that wider thinking work can start leading towards that insight on what you actually need to address and where you should focus your attention to make the biggest, difference in terms of how you move forward. Small practical steps can make a big difference. Ultimately, as with any change management, it's about having a plan and driving it through and taking people on that journey with you. So, but small practical steps can really, really help in terms of doing that and really having a focus. And like I say, starting with those, early things, those small things that really sort of move things forward. Having open respectful and really honest conversations, as I mentioned, is really, really important for that overall sort of culture piece and how you move things forward. It's critical to long-term success and really important to have. And obviously reinforcing those boundaries, as I mentioned, is really, really important too. All right, so final bit on me, and then I will go to the sort of comments, questions, other things in terms of it. So how I can help. So as I say, that's my website, orchardparkconsulting.co.uk. I focus on leadership, governance, and strategy. And so within that are some of these areas in terms of the things that I do and provide: interim chief exec roles, mentoring, board recruitment and development, governance reviews, strategy development, and being a sort of a critical friend, and obviously support on skills-based volunteering and moving things forward in those areas as well. So sort of related to this, I guess, my services that probably most, are most relevant to what we've talked about today. Maybe you're looking at doing some board recruitment. Maybe you're thinking about how you can diversify your board and move it forward. Maybe you're thinking through board development and looking at training or away days or support on those difficult conversations. Maybe you're thinking about growing your offer in terms of skill-based volunteering and diversifying it. Maybe you're looking for mentoring or someone who's a critical friend who's maybe been on some of those experiences and journeys and can help you with moving forward on a regular basis. And maybe you're looking at doing a governance review and looking at the full sort of picture and how you can move forward and practice and recommendations around that. So that's some of the areas that I can potentially help you with. So there's my QR code, which will take you hopefully to the website, and there's my details on there. You can find me on LinkedIn, Rob Avann. You can obviously look at my website, orchardparkconsulting.co.uk, and feel free to email me, rob@orchardparkconsulting.co.uk as well. But just remains to say massive thank you for listening to me this afternoon and coming along to hear me speak. Really lovely to be asked to do this. And thanks again to Mushka and everyone at Vontiro for hosting me and having me along as well.
Oh,
so brilliant. Back to you, Mushka.
Good. I feel like take a breath. That was really impressive, and 45 minutes of talking, and I got so many takeaway notes, and so many things stood out for me. So I'll be interested to hear from the floor if there was any questions around it. A lot of food for thought. I might even actually go back to the recording and pick out some things that I want to take on. Yeah, really good. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording and then we'll go to the Q&A, just so that it's a nice safe space for us all here. Oh no, I was about to end the thing. I don't know how to.